Cardinal Humbert, representing the Catholic Church delegation, entered the Hagia Sophia Church and placed a document in front of Michael IV Cerularius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, who was preparing for the liturgy. Humbert then left Hagia Sophia and Constantinople, returning to Rome. The document left by Humbert declared that the Patriarch had been excommunicated by the Archbishop of Rome, the Pope. On the same day, the Patriarch convened a church council and excommunicated those who had excommunicated him. Thus, July 16, 1054, became the official date of the separation of the Western and Eastern churches, an event known by historians as the Great Schism or the East-West Schism. This separation did not happen suddenly. Its roots stretched back hundreds of years. Throughout the Middle Ages, one of the primary debates among Christian clergy was about which church held universal supremacy. The archbishops of Rome, or the popes, claimed that supremacy belonged to the Western Church. They argued that Peter, one of Jesus' apostles, had come to Rome, established a church there, and was martyred there. According to the papacy's claim, Peter was the first archbishop of Rome, and his successors represented him. Jesus himself, as the founder of the church, had pointed to Peter. Additionally, Paul, who made great efforts to spread Christianity, had also come to Rome and was martyred there. The Western Church claimed that the bones of both Peter and Paul were buried under a church in the Vatican. Thus, the Roman Church stood on the side of Christianity's two greatest martyrs, demonstrating the universal supremacy of the Roman archbishop. In contrast, the Eastern Church explained its supremacy with a more worldly approach. Constantinople was the capital of the empire and the residence of the emperor. In pre-Christian Roman religion, emperors were considered the heads of religious authority. This tradition continued after the capital moved to Constantinople in the 4th century AD. Emperors like Constantine, Theodosius, and Justinian had religious authority. For the Eastern Church, the matter was quite simple. Wherever the emperor was, the church there should be superior to all other churches. This struggle for supremacy played a significant role in the rift between the Eastern and Western churches throughout the Middle Ages. The issue was not about whose reasons were more reasonable. Both churches wanted power over the others. Although the conflict seemed more political than religious, there was also a cultural aspect. By 1054, there were some fundamental differences between the two churches that had persisted for many years. Some of these differences, seemingly simple, eventually played a role in the division. For example, in the Eastern Church, it was traditional for the clergy to have beards, while there was no such tradition in the Western Church. Clergy in the Eastern Church could marry, whereas in the Western Church, they could not. There were differences in practices during certain rituals. The Western Church was more dogmatic. The Pope's words could not be questioned under any circumstances. In contrast, the Orthodox believed that the Patriarch was also human and could make mistakes. Besides these, the biggest problem between the two churches was not just about practices. When the Roman Empire split in 395, the boundaries created were not only political, but also cultural. Latin culture was dominant in the West, while Greek culture prevailed in the East. The official language of the Western Church was Latin, whereas the Eastern Church used Greek. Even emperors had switched from Latin to Greek for speaking and writing from the 5th century onwards. Language became a significant problem between the two churches over time, because they could not communicate effectively in theological discussions. For instance, a letter sent from Constantinople in the 5th century went unanswered for months in Rome because no one could translate it. Similarly, letters sent from Rome were disregarded in Constantinople because they were in Latin. By the 5th century, some Eastern Church clergy claimed that the Pope spoke the language of barbarians and should never have authority over Constantinople. Another point of contention was the belief in the Trinity, specifically the formula of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In Christianity's early years, emperors organized a series of councils to resolve controversial religious issues. These councils were meetings where high-ranking clergy gathered to discuss religious matters. The first council was convened by Emperor Constantine in Nicaea, modern-day Iznik, in 325. The formula of the Trinity was clarified at the Council of Constantinople in 381, stating that the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father, or God. However, the Western Church changed this at the Council of Toledo in 589, declaring that the Holy Spirit proceeded from both the Father and the Son, or Jesus. This change was made to emphasize the importance of Jesus and protect him from heretical views. Initially, this did not cause a problem between the two churches because the Eastern Church was unaware of the decision for years due to the language barrier. Once they found out, they regarded it as heresy. Historians refer to this issue as the Filioque controversy, derived from the Latin term meaning and from the Son. In the early years of Christianity, there was no hierarchy among the churches. Their relationship was mainly about exchanging information. However, with decisions made at general councils, 5 churches were considered superior and gained certain powers over other churches in their regions. These were the churches of Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. Eastern clergy referred to this system as pentarchy, or the rule of 5. In the early years of pentarchy, the Roman archbishopric was considered to have precedence over the other archbishoprics. Over time, however, emperors began to increase the importance of Constantinople and allied with other regional patriarchs to gain more religious authority. This inevitably deepened the rift between the East and West. In the early years, popes had to submit to the political power of emperors. They needed the emperor's support to become pope. This situation continued for several centuries. In 726, Byzantine Emperor Leo III banned the worship of images and icons of Jesus and the saints. Pope Gregory III strongly opposed this iconoclasm, declaring that anyone involved in it was excommunicated. However, the letter containing this declaration never reached Constantinople because the messengers were arrested in Byzantine-controlled Sicily. In 751, the Lombards seized several cities in northern Italy and began to threaten Rome, leading to a new chapter in the history of the Catholic Church. The Pope sought help from Pepin the Short, the king of the Franks, against the Lombards. A devout man, Pepin responded positively, marched into Italy with his army, and defeated the Lombards. Pepin's generosity did not stop there. He declared that the territories from Rome to Ravenna were donated to the papacy. Thus, the Pope became not only the sole religious authority in the West, but also the ruler of a state in central Italy. This was a turning point in Christian history. The process continued in 800 when Pepin's son Charlemagne was declared emperor by the Pope. During the same period, Empress Irene, a woman, occupied the Byzantine throne. The widely accepted view was that the emperor should be male. With Charlemagne's coronation, the emperor now resided in the West, theoretically shifting supremacy to the West. Although Irene was deposed in 802 and replaced by Emperor Nicephorus, neither the papacy nor the Franks renounced their claims to the imperial title. This situation naturally deepened the division further. However, the event that caused the final break occurred shortly after the Normans conquered southern Italy. Before the Normans, much of southern Italy was under Byzantine control. From the 11th century onwards, these regions gradually fell to the Normans, who were loyal to the Catholic Church. However, there was a problem. The churches in these areas continued to follow Eastern liturgical practices. In 1053, the Pope issued a decree requiring these churches to adopt Latin rites. Otherwise, they would be closed. This decision was met with anger in the East, and in retaliation, the Patriarch declared that all Latin churches in Constantinople would be closed. the dispute between the two churches suddenly escalated into a diplomatic crisis. To find a middle ground, the Pope sent a delegation led by French Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople in June 1054. The negotiations between Cardinal Humbert and Patriarch Michael were negative from the start. Humbert gave Michael a letter advising him to submit to the authority of the papacy. Additionally, Humbert's condescending attitude during the negotiations greatly offended Michael. After this, Michael refused to meet the Roman delegation for a long time. The cardinals remained in Constantinople for a few more weeks. Eventually, Humbert, angered by the treatment he received, entered Hagia Sophia on the morning of July 16th and placed the excommunication document, sealed by the Pope, on the altar in front of the Patriarch. This was the final straw. With the Emperor's support, Patriarch Michael excommunicated Cardinal Humbert and the delegation that came with him. This decision formally severed the ties between the Eastern and Western churches. Initially, the people were not significantly affected by this separation. Christians in the East and West continued to maintain good relations in regions where they lived together. However, over time, the tensions between the churches also strained relations among the people. The Crusades intensified these disagreements, reaching their peak when the Latins captured Constantinople in 1204. Over the years, attempts to reconcile the churches mostly failed. The problem between the Eastern and Western churches remains unresolved to this day, and does not seem likely to be resolved in the foreseeable future. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe.